Good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is the troubles and problems of being a Black person in a predominantly white country or society. I mean, being Black in a predominantly white, or Asian, or any other race society is not an easy task. This can be whether in America, Europe, or Asia. Black people all over the world always have to prove something before they can be free. It's very unfortunate, fellows, but that's the reality that Black folks have to deal with in this world. And this is not about playing race against any race or other races and so on and so forth. I mean, this subject today has to do with last week's unfortunate death. I mean, the shooting death of a Madison, Wisconsin resident, Ruiz, by a Madison, Wisconsin police officer last week after a call came in from, I think, one of the residents in Madison, Wisconsin, alleging that there's a guy going around trying to break into cars. So the police, responded as usual. And this dude, Corey, who was on a bike, was allegedly considered to be the suspect. So the police, chased him down, and in a struggle, apparently he came out, drew out his knife, and stabbed one police officer. But he was able to restrain by 4 police officers who had him on the ground. But coincidentally, and unfortunately, the very police officer that he stabbed was the one that shot him. And unfortunately, he died. I don't know if it was an emotional accident from that police officer, because he had been the one that Corey had stabbed earlier. So out of emotions and anger, whether he decided, to revenge, I don't know. He's the only person who knows what exactly happened. But that is the unfortunate incident that happened last week in Madison, Wisconsin. Another Black dude allegedly trying to break into people's cars ended up losing his life. Whilst you had 4 police officers pretty much had him on the ground, restrained. And why that man will lose his life is very, very unfortunate. Very, very, very unfortunate, and can never be understood. I mean, when you have police officers on one man, yes, the man had a gun. He had stabbed one officer earlier, but this man had been restrained and was on the floor. So how in the world one man who has been restrained on the ground by 4 police officers ended up dying from a gunshot from one of the police officers, coincidentally, the very police officer that he stabbed earlier? It is sad and very unfortunate. And this reminds me and takes me back to George Floyd's incident in Minnesota, which also pretty much, it wasn't a gunshot by choke. Police officer had his knee on his neck that eventually will also kill him. And then even with that said, also incident happened in Wisconsin a couple of years ago also, where another Black dude was also killed there. So this brings the question of how come that with all these incidents, especially after the aftermath of George Floyd incident, when you thought that police institutions all across the country would have learned something about how to restrain themselves and how to handle these issues, but these issues keep popping up and happening over and over and over again. I mean, is this about police training? Or is this about emotions? Or is it just about trigger-happy police officers? I mean, I cannot answer these questions because at the end of the day, the officer who committed this unfortunate incident is the only one who knows what happened and why he decided to pull his trigger. Apparently, they had used the taser on him and all that stuff, and he was still, swinging at them and stuff. And I get all of that. By the end of the day, if you have 4 police officers on one man on the ground, I mean, fellas, let's be real here. I mean, this man was on the ground. This man doesn't deserve to be shot. He should never be shot at that position, especially being on the ground with 4 police officers on top of him. But that's what happened. And this is what brings me to the subject today of a Black person living in a predominantly white society or country, what he or she has to do to make sure that they don't put themselves in that situation. And these incidents happen, and also have Black people who tend to have, the opportunity to be on some of these big networks, and talk about it. And some pretty much wear these, social justice incidents, emotionally on their sleeves, and eventually also ended up costing their jobs and them losing their jobs because of their emotions that is attached to incidents like this. Because if you're a Black person living in America or anywhere in the world, and things like this happen, and you see these things going on over and over and over again, definitely at some point people are going to react. But the unfortunate truth about it is that if you also happen to be in a certain position, such as being in the media, news media, where you tend to have certain privileges to talk about certain things, you got to also be very careful not to get involved in these social justice issues, especially whilst on air. And this brings me to the issue that happened also last week with ESPN sports analyst Clarke, who was fired. Apparently, ESPN saying that they're laying people off. So they laid a lot of people off. So nobody knows exactly why they were laid off, or Clarke was laid off or fired. But based on what was coming out from people on social media and ESPN itself and so on and so forth, it became clear that Clarke at some point had absorbed or relinquished all his good gestures that he has had on ESPN for quite some time now. So he had a situation where he had an incident with another analyst, which didn't go well. And I think that was badly managed on his part due to the way he, talked, which seems to be like he was talking down on the other sports analyst. But he also talked about other issues involving these social justice issues. When you talk about basketball, WNBA, injuries, and Clarke, and other, issues, which pretty much he was always at the forefront of these social justice issues whilst on air with Get Up with ESPN. So apparently his social justice opinions that he's been talking about whilst on air didn't sit well to so many people. It didn't sit well with ESPN executives and the big bosses of ESPN. Because if you look at the performance of Clarke on ESPN, he's done a pretty good job on ESPN. And as a matter of fact, he had a very emotional interview with one of his own program, Pivot, podcast or so, where he pretty much cried, talking about what he thought he had done to accommodate what ESPN was expecting of him. And in the end, he made even a comment that also drew a lot of criticism, that he would try to be as less Black as he could be whilst he was on ESPN. But the mistake most of these sports analysts and Black folks who get to be on these corporate media shows and stuff is that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your opinions are, especially when it comes to these social justice issues. You got to be very, very careful to tread these issues very, very carefully. You have to navigate them very, very carefully. Yes, you have your opinion. Yes, you believe certain things are not right, especially taking into consideration you being black and in America and the history of America and so on and so forth in terms of race and so on. I get all of that. But you also have to navigate and come to understand that when you are put in such places like being a sports analyst on ESPN and so on and so forth, your social justice opinion is your opinion. You got to tread these things very carefully because whilst on air, not everything that you got to jump in on. Yes, you might have a take on one or two issues. Yes, that you can they can let go. But when it becomes the norm, and you tend to look like an angry black man on that program, eventually, the executives of these networks will do something about it. And apparently, he was rubbing off very badly with some of these executives because of how he came across, especially with his opinions on a lot of these social justice issues. And eventually, they decided to let him go. But if you look at a lot of other black media personalities that have come and gone and still some doing very well, they understood how to navigate the issue of race and these social justice issues. Because if not for that, people like Oprah Winfrey, Oprah Winfrey was the #1 talk show host for how many years? I pretty much, even I would put it together, queen and king of talk show. Nobody came close to Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah Winfrey happens to be a black woman. But she was able to navigate this. She understood the system. And she knew when to bring issues with regards to race, even social justice issues, and how to navigate it. Not to show biases against other races. So she was able to present the argument in a way that everybody could understand. But everybody also knew Oprah Winfrey was a very proud black woman. A black woman who believed in herself and who have done a lot and accomplished a lot. But yet, she was able to navigate through these issues because she also understood the business, the economic side of the business. And unfortunately, for some of these young folks that get on these new networks, yes, they want to make their cases, to wear their social justice on their sleeves and so on and so forth, but they forget that this is business. ESPN, all you know, wouldn't like to fire him. But they have to if they tend to believe that you are creating an environment where maybe they are losing corporate sponsorships, corporate advertisements, and so on and so forth. So eventually, looking at their bottom line, which is all about their money, because at the end of the day, if they cannot get enough corporate sponsors to advertise on that program, there's no need for them to have anybody on that program. So it boils down to the money. So everything boils down to the money. So it's a business decision. Yes, I get it. Clarke, it's unfortunate. He's a very good analyst and all of that. He used to be a former football safety, and all that. I get all of that. But at the end of the day, it's all about the money and the numbers, especially when you have majority of the country being white folks who also tend to be the ones who tune into these sports networks. And when you have a lot of these majority of these white folks who start to tune out of ESPN programs just because maybe they don't like the social justice, take by some of the analysts, these executives will go back to the drawing board and make a decision of whether to continue to allow that to happen on their networks, thereby eliminating a lot of folks that used to tune in or get rid of this a problem that they have with their analyst. And they will do that at any given time. They will let go any analyst whom they consider to be divisive or somebody who is pretty much bringing down their program and also losing corporate sponsors and so on and so forth. And that is unfortunately, that is what happened with Ryan Clarke. It's very unfortunate that he had to go through all of that. But that is the reality. As a black person in America, it doesn't matter where you are. When it comes to the issue of race and social justice, yes, these are very legitimate issues. Very legitimate issues for people to talk about. I mean, killing of George Floyd, I mean, the death of Ruiz, and so on and so forth. These are legitimate issues. But at the end of the day, also, you got to be very careful how you present these issues, especially when you have bosses who pretty much also are looking at the bottom line of the organization. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, some of these folks don't read into these things. They tend to think that, oh, yes, I have an opinion. Yes, you have an opinion, but ESPN is not yours. You don't own ESPN. Even if you do own ESPN and you don't have the highest share in ESPN, you can still be fired. I mean, people own stuff and still get laid off. I mean, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple when he and Steve Wozniak founded Apple. So it happens all the time. So at the end of the day, not until you have your own podcast where you might not care about sponsors and so on and so forth, like I do, I can give my opinion on anything I want. And nobody can hold me accountable for that. The only people who can hold me accountable is YouTube. If they don't like it, they might pull me off. By the end of the day, I'm not looking for any sponsor to tell me what to say. But if I get a sponsor who is giving me big money and telling me that, look, this is how we want your program to go, and we don't want you to be getting involved in this, and then I got to also weigh my options. And if I really need their sponsorship, then I have to just, go by what they're asking me to do. That is the reality. That is the reality of how these things work. Because at the end of the day, these social justice issues that have popped up, especially with regards to the new media outlets that we have in the world right now, talk about social media, internet access, and so on and so forth, it has changed the ball game. So if you are going to be a good analyst with any big time media outlet and you want to keep your job, then you got to learn how to navigate through these organizations. I mean, Stephen A. Smith also is on Get Up. I mean, he's been there for a while. I mean, he has his own podcast that he talks about other stuff, politics. But even with that, he's so smart. He knows how to navigate through all of that. He knows how to work around it, because at the end of the day, that's how you are able to be successful and still be able to keep your job. It just boils down to how to be able to navigate through all of this. Yes, everybody has opinion. Like I said, very legitimate subject to talk about in terms of social justice. I mean, when you talk about DEI and some of the government programs and other stuff that are being eliminated, so these are legitimate stuff to talk about. By the end of the day, the country is bigger than just one race. Majority of the people in this country are still white folks. And majority of the decisions that are made are tailored towards the majority of the people, who also happens to control the money in this country. So if those folks are the ones who control everything, including the money that comes in, then you cannot mess with that stuff. I mean, you cannot mess with that stuff. I mean, that's the reality. You might disagree with my take, but at the end of the day, that is the real deal. That's the reality. That's how it works. Because if white folks, and looking at what even transpired after he was fired, I mean, you had a lot of these podcasters, mainly white podcasters, who were even applauding ESPN to the extent that some people were even putting on social media talking about he should have been fired a long time ago. They didn't know why it took so long for ESPN to get rid of it. So that tells you exactly how a lot of people felt. And that's the normal thing. I mean, it happens in America all the time. Because at the end of the day, you have all these stuff going on, and you have polls that will show a certain way. But in the end, you see the majority of white folks support that. So it's not an easy task to be a black folk in a predominantly white culture, white society, white country, you know, whether in America or even in Europe or anywhere else in the world. It is a tough task to deal with, to navigate through a lot of things. And unfortunately, a good guy, with good intentions, he also had to lose his job because of that. But the bottom line is going back to what had happened to Ruiz, which is very, very sad and unfortunate. I mean, young 38-year-old dude riding his bike and allegedly trying to break into cars, parked cars in Madison, Wisconsin, had to lose his life. Just like George Floyd and other black folks who have lost their lives. And I hope at some point the country will come together to realize that some of these police tactics have to change because it doesn't make sense, especially when you take into consideration you have 4 police officers subduing one dude. Even if that dude had a knife and had stabbed one person, you had 4 people who had already subdued this dude. For that dude to be shot and killed is a very sad thing and should never have happened. All right, fellas. So if it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys and have a great week. Thank you guys and peace and love.